Hey, this is Chad with Drawn and Cornered. It is Wednesday, August 11th, and here's the news that you need to worry about today. So it appears that yesterday or the day before, I can't remember now, the Senate passed through the initial infrastructure bill, the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. Now, this is the one that was bipartisan, that 10 Republicans or Republicans and Democrats together figured out and signed. And this is kind of the cleaner infrastructure bill. This is the one that deals with almost primarily entirely infrastructure. Now, that may have a little trouble in the House because apparently it doesn't go far enough on a lot of different progressive agenda items. There's not enough involved for different things that they're looking for as far as climate change and others in that bill. So it's possible that there's pushback from the left on that one. There'll also be pushback from the right, but for kind of a different reason. There'll be pushback from the right because essentially everything that they couldn't get in that $1 billion bill, Democrats just put over into a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that they'll be passing, which they'll call infrastructure, they'll call climate change, but includes tons of extra stuff that I would argue that no reasonable politician should be voting for as it stands currently, which is why you will find there is zero Republican support for it. Now, the reason why Republicans might push back against the bipartisan bill is because it appears as though it's just crafted to gain their support for something, and then everything else is going to be thrown into that secondary bill. So it's all going to happen regardless, and they're sort of being used to just make this seem like a bipartisan issue when it's clearly not. The Democrats are just offloading all that other stuff and taking care of it through the Budget Reconciliation Act, which is sort of a loophole, sort of not. It's built to allow budgetary issues to take place in Congress with only a 50% vote as opposed to a 60% vote. But these are not budgetary issues. This is just a massive expansion of the nanny state and entitlements that the government is going to be offering and so on. So it's a little bit tricky on that side. The second thing that happened that is pretty interesting, Cuomo resigned. He resigned as New York governor. Exactly when that's going to be taking effect is unknown. Exactly what's going to happen afterwards is unknown. Whether the criminal complaints are still going to carry forward, whether he's still in any sort of trouble, whether Chris Cuomo, his brother on CNN, is going to be leaving also, given that the ties between the two and the cover that he was providing for his brother and the lack of reporting on his brother and all of these other things are, I think, ultimately leaving a pretty bad taste in Americans' mouths. So we'll see whether or not that happens. But he went down. Now, the big push that we're seeing because of that is, hey, Democrats are holding their sexual assaulters and their bad guys to account. What are the Republicans going to do about Trump? And the answer is ultimately that the AG in New York, who is willing to hand down this report on Cuomo, also wants his job. So it's understandable that she might hit him pretty hard. I'm sure there are AGs out there. I'm sure the AG in New York is not friendly, where a lot of Trump's indiscretions or issues may have occurred, where a lot of his complaints are from. A similar report can be filed. As soon as that report comes forward and we've got tangible evidence of things that have happened and names of complainants and them being on the record saying this is what happened and even criminal filings, then we can start talking about that stuff. We can also start talking about the difference between what happened 15, 20 years ago and what happened last year. And it might be just as bad, but let's not delude ourselves into thinking that those two are exactly the same things, because they're not. Those are different things. But we will see how that shakes out as well. The other thing that happened yesterday, which is really kind of incredible, I didn't believe this would ever happen, but the Texas Supreme Court handed down arrest warrants for the senators and congresspeople, the state congresspeople that left, so that a quorum couldn't be done, so that Texas couldn't get their business done. And the question that I was asking that I thought was paramount in this discussion is, the assault on the Capitol on January 6th was considered to be different from the BLM riots because it was actually attacking democracy and not systemic racism or some other issue. Even though the violence in both sides was terrible, and BLM attacked federal buildings and federal agents the exact same way that the 1/6 riots did. The 1/6 riots were worse because they were an attack on democracy itself. The functioning of the government was trying to be taken down so that it wouldn't work. Fine. Then shouldn't we have a similar amount of derision for these Texas legislators who abandoned their posts and would not allow the wheels of government to turn and to have the effect that it's supposed to have. They essentially halted democracy by evading, against the law, their duty to stand there and legislate. And though it wasn't violent, but the violence wasn't the thing, because BLM was violent. BLM was violent, but that's different because it wasn't an assault on democracy. So that's how it's different from 1-6. Well, we have another assault on democracy here, and the left is silent about it. They are legitimately breaking the law to ensure that government cannot run. And I don't know how much closer you can get to a 1/6 issue than that. But nobody's provided me an answer on that, so I'll continue to ask. Whether or not these arrest warrants are actually served and put into action, or if it's just more saber rattling and a threat, we will see as those lawmakers get back to Texas. The last thing, and this will be a long-term story, something that we'll have to follow up on, I'm guessing over years and perhaps even decades, but Taliban is back, and they are pushing across the country now that the Americans have dumped out, and will probably be putting significant pressure on Kabul, and maybe even taking back over the entire country, and we will see if the Taliban has to be answered for again. But at least we're out of there, and Joe Biden ended that and left all of Afghanistan essentially in a lurch, essentially at the mercy of whatever warlord or Taliban warlords wanted to step in and fill that vacuum. So I guess we can all be very proud of the work that was done there and the money that was spent and everything we did to ensure that the Taliban didn't have a foothold, to just relinquish it all immediately back to the Taliban. So that's great also. Later this week, we'll be getting a little bit more into the IPCC's report on climate change and what that means, and kind of the hysteria that's around the climate issue in general. Now remember, many of these people that'll be screaming at you about climate change took a voluntary trip to Obama's 60th birthday party, many of them on private jets. Many of them will also tell you that your ability to travel and to utilize the things that you do for your life aren't good, but they are special and thus require private jets, private parties, huge houses, multiple houses, all of these things that they'll tell you are bad for the environment, but they're okay, one, because they can pay for it, and two, because at least they're on the right side of the issue. And we'll be getting a little bit deeper into that later this week. If you have any questions for me, comments, definitely leave them down below. This is Drawn and Cornered. Thank you for coming out today, and I will see you tomorrow.